Hey y'all, welcome back to the Bergerac channel. This is Jim, your humble host, and today we're going to show you part 2 of the Kawasaki Cafe Racer. Alright, so we're at the forks right now. We got the triple tree together. This is obviously the part that you saw in the other videos at the bottom. Top sets in. The problem with this setup, when we're going from Ducati to Kawasaki, is we need a new insert in here. And what this does is it lines everything up, lines the triple tree up on the shaft so that we get correct steering. And if you come in and look down inside there, you will see that it's off-centered. So unfortunately what we have to do is take the head off the triple tree, get all the measurements. You can see I've started a little drawing. Like I always say, if you can't draw it, you can't make it. So we need to be able to draw it, and we'll come back and I'll show you the drawing, and then we'll start machining it out on the lathe. Okay, so loosened up the top of the triple tree. You can see it's kind of convenient that everything stays in place. So now this, you can see the ridge here where it steps down. That's going to be critical for my drawing. So I have 600 thousandths for the height this way. Then the bolt will go into the top. It'll go straight down through there. So we have to make this little step down, and then it's going to be almost touching the locking spanner washers. Because everything's not compressed, I'm going to leave a little bit of space where it's not actually touching that finalized. So let me get my drawing finished, and we'll kind of put this back together while I'm turning it on the lathe. Okay, so the drawing's all set. We got everything measured out. This will be the drawing, and this will be the solid stock that I'm going to cut it from. So yeah, it's a little bit bigger, but that's nice. I can hold it in the machine. We'll get it turned the outside diameter first, and then start cutting all the inside diameters. So all these dimensions are off from any normal American type measurement. None of them actually make a measurement except for the 250 because it's metric. So everything's off, but we're actually going to do it in thousandths. It will work out the same. A measurement is a measurement. It doesn't matter whether you're measuring it in hairs or you're measuring it in thousandths. It'll work the same. Alright, so here's the piece all finished. Now, like I said, if you can't draw it, you can't build it. This part's really important to the bike because it holds the triple tree from coming back a little bit. So if you'll notice, when I go to put it in, it doesn't sit. When I pull in the triple tree, it drops right in. So the triple tree, as it goes back a little bit, because that part's in there. Now we left it a little high, and that's fine. We'll bolt it down, put the bolt in there and bolt it down. When we tighten up the rest of the bearings, if we need to, we can trim it later on the lathe if we want to bring it down flush with the top of the triple tree. So it's time to move on to something new or different on the bike. We got this out of the way, and we'll do the final modifications when it's done. All right, well now it's exciting. I actually got a chill running up and down my leg right now because we're getting so excited about putting this together. We set up on the bench and make it a lot easier for us to work on. Then we'll be putting this on the motorcycle lift later on. But we got all our really cool parts done, and we're gonna go over everything that we did for the assembly part of it and show you how to actually make a cafe racer really work. We've spent a considerable amount of time engineering and making this work. Remember, this is Bernie's project, and the motorcycle frame, we're upgrading parts like you would. I'm sure you all know if you're watching this, or maybe this will give you a little bit of a insight to perhaps making your own cafe racer. The whole concept with the cafe racers was during the 1950s in England. Cafe racer was any motorcycle that went over 100 miles an hour. So what they started doing was basically cutting down the motorcycle to make it lighter. Remember, this is a chromoly frame, so it's even lighter than what they had in the 50s. So they were dealing with a lot of tubular steel, things like that. The components would have been quite a bit heavier. And they were also dealing with single piston, double piston engines. They weren't putting out the horsepower. So in order to get over 100 miles an hour and meet the cafe racer standards of a street bike, they had to cut parts off. This got a 4-cylinder in it. It's easy to get over 100 miles an hour, but we're going back to the design of the cafe racer. Basically, we're kind of going with that cafe racer standard, but on much newer components and make it look really cool. So a little bit of history for you, something I didn't necessarily know at the time, but you can do, obviously find out a lot of this information yourself and learn more about it and how to do it. What we want to do is give you the safest, best way of doing it and how we find it works. Because a lot of people produce videos out there that just don't give you enough information. So that's kind of followed through with what we're doing today, but the components and everything are so much cooler. Like even some of the stuff from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, some of these components are 2007 components. And it's 2017. Well, we're putting it on an 82, 83, 81 frame style bikes, and it's going to make a whole lot of difference. The one problem with that is engineering and figuring out how to do it. Now you saw this Ducati swing arm before it had flat paint on it and before we had done all of the work to make it look really nice. The concept was to be able to take the original bolt that was going through here that held the original Kawasaki swing arm, and we had to come up with a way of doing that. So that was a 5/8 bolt that went through. Well, the rod that goes through the swing arm, slides into the swing arm from the Ducati, was in itself larger than 5/8. We have that slid in there. So what we did was I put it on the lathe and I drilled it out larger in diameter in the center, and then I tapped it for a 5/8 fine thread. Now if you'll notice, this 5/8 fine thread fits perfectly into the Kawasaki hole that was there. Well, tapping the inside of this pipe and then bolting everything together like so allows us for a really cool place to put the swing arm. This didn't happen all at once. We also had to cut the frame and weld a section in there, so we had to spread it. We trimmed down some of the swing arm to make it a little thinner so that this didn't have to be as wide. The engine didn't have to be spaced quite so thick, and the wider you make this, the more your engine mount points are off. Putting a lot of information here, but remember your sprocket has to line up with your chain to the rear wheel too. So that's going to be something that we're going to go over on the next video, but on this one I want to put all the components together and show you really detailed. So with the swing arm, you get this stainless steel pipe with it, or this tube. So like I said, I drilled it out and tapped the inside of it. How this is going to vary is this is going to be bolted to the frame solidly, and then the swing arm is just going to be tightened up a little bit, and it's going to come up and down on there. It's going to be able to rotate on this. All right, so let's assemble the swing arm. And we've dry fit this a couple times. We haven't done it since it's been painted, but I'm using a full synthetic grease, and I'm just going to apply the grease right inside the swing arm with a Q-tip, a little bit more on the other one. But we want to be somewhat careful because this is flat paint on this, and with flat paint, once you put grease on it, it starts to shine a little bit. It takes a little bit more effort to get it clean. So put grease on the ends, which this is going to slide all the way down the shaft except for the last end. And I'm going to go ahead and slide this into the swing arm. Now we don't want a lot of grease going into the end of the hole, so we want to make sure we clean that out. And the reason why is we're going to end up Loctiting the bolts in so they can't move as easily. We really don't want the synthetic grease and the Loctite becoming mixed up. Now here's the real interesting part of what we did yesterday is we actually created our own stainless steel washers, and they're 22.5 thousandths in thickness, polished up, and I did that on the disc sander. These are extremely important because they take up exactly the distance of the 5/8 shaft and where the frame is, and they'll allow the two items not to rub when the swing arm's moving. They'll go right on here. 22 thousandths is the distance of the thickness of the washers with the correct hole inside. So we had to make those. So now when it was all together, and the satisfaction of it was that these washers actually fit in 100% perfect. But in order to hold it correctly, I'm going to slide one in. I'm going to put a pencil in there, and it's going to hold the washer accordingly. At least hold it in there for me while I get the other side in. I put a pencil in there. Now we're going to Loctite the bolts in place. It's Loctite. You know, this stuff's standard. I mean, it's been around forever. We're using the blue 242. If you've ever used this stuff before, you know that you don't have to go extremely crazy with it, but it's good to have it applied to all the threads that's going to actually be fastened. Now this bolt, because of the frame, only goes in so far. Okay, now I'll start on this side. I'll very gently use the pencil to get the washer in the right place. But yeah, it worked that easy. Time to do the other side. A little Loctite on there. Nice thing about fine threads, they're either going to go in or they're not. A little harder to cross thread, in my opinion, than maybe a coarse thread is, because you know as soon as you start spinning it in that it's in the right position. So the washer had actually made it a little bit more difficult to do this side to get everything lined up. What I'm going to do is just hold to one side with the wrench. Try not to damage any paint. That's a big deal. It's like Sean painted this up really nice for us. Did a heck of a job on the second application of paint. Okay, this is the first time that this has actually been together, this completed. Oh, so smooth. We have no rack, doesn't move at all. The bike's moving, of course, but it's nice and perfect in there. These parts, you saw me welding them on and assembling them before it was painted. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our shock absorbers on now. So, we're going to take this out. I know you all see me on video doing everything, but I didn't do all of this myself. Now you remember that Bernie had turned these down. We need to get these shock absorbers working properly. This did not fit on there. It fitted on the thread part just fine, but I'll show you on the other side of the bike where it's got a shoulder on it. What we did was we ran a die over the top of it, reduced some of the material, and that left us with a thread impression. Then we ran a smaller die over it, take a little bit more off, and then it was die grinder, files, emery cloth, and bicep work. Okay, so this is the other quarter, and you can see the shoulder on there. It doesn't look anything like the side that Bernie and I worked on. You notice how the shock doesn't go on. Let's see how it works now. This should go on there pretty stiff. Hey Bernie, would it be all right if I put a little grease on there just to make it go on a little bit? What I'm just going to do is just apply a little bit to the inside, just to make sure I don't tear the rubber up. A little lubrication takes care of a whole bunch of problems. Not sure if you want to actually use synthetic grease in the bedroom, but you can try it and let me know how it works out. Makes everybody so much happier. One side's on. Let's do the exact same thing for the other side. Okay, let me put the nuts on. We're going to do everything loose. Set that on. So now what we're doing is we're setting the height of the shocks so they're both parallel and they'll go into the bolts on the swing arm properly. So we've done most of this off camera, but I'll show you how we did it. Took the large calipers and went to the bottom of the spring on that side and then tightened this one up to make it even. What I did is I locked the calipers so they would be the same, and you can see it fits right over that notch pretty close. Now this is subject to ride height, or ride style actually, and they may be adjusted later on, but for mocking it up and putting it together, we basically need them to both be at the same length. So we've done that by making sure that the springs are the same length. These are already tightened all the way up as far as they go, and they may in fact come off later on and you adjust them down, but you have to go through. The spring should always be at the right tension. So now the springs are tensioned properly. All Bernie has to do is back this one off a quarter, back that one off a quarter. You really probably will never have to measure it again exactly. But it does allow us to be able to put the swing arm on really easy and make it look like we knew what we were doing while we were on camera. All right, so remember we're still dealing with a nice painted surface. I get this lined up correctly so it slides in. Remember, these parts are custom made to go in here, so they have to be pretty much exact. You see how this one's hitting on this side, won't allow it in. So now everything's going to have to go in really square and really straight to make it work. Okay, so these lined up nicely. They have to be exactly in the right position in order to work. Okay, so we went and tightened up the springs, we got everything correct. And then, of course, engineering, building stuff that not built before. This side of the swing arm is perfectly straight. When we go to put this side in on the pin, everything's matched here, so they're matched all in the same distances. So now we have a difference in height, and you can tell the swing arm's not moving. So we're going to adjust it here and get it down to the correct distance so that we can actually put that bolt in. And that's it. And we believe that that's due to this side of the swing arm coming out further away from the motorcycle to allow for the chain. We already know that we have the same tension. That really looks like it might want a half more turn. So let's try that. Now that'll go in. Okay, we're that far. Now there's an obvious problem here. The distance from the center of the tire to the tabletop, my distance to where the axle has to go through, are completely different. So we're going to adjust the 2x4 up to make sure that the wheel rolls in properly, because it's not going to work the way it is right now. So give us a second and we'll be right back. Okay, so now we're ready to put the wheel in. We've set the wheel. Of course, we had the bolts going the other way to hold the shocks. And again, when you're making something custom, you find out all kinds of interesting stuff. So the sprocket was actually going to hit the bolt. We had to turn it around. What we may end up having to do is just put a fancy cap nut on the end if we want it to look a little nicer. Okay, that side of the axle's in. Gentle to do this. You don't need to do it. Just try to drive it in and then have something happen. Line up our adjustment arm on this side, and it came popping through the frame. So we did well. Okay, so now you have to do all your adjustments to get your axle correct. Put the nut on, then obviously tighten the other side up, get it correct. We'll have to tighten this side up, but you have all seen the basic assembly and how to get a swing arm to work for a cafe racer, as well as the steering in the front and the effort that we had to go through on that. We really hope you like this video, and we hope it's helpful for you. Subscribe to our channel if you would, give me a thumbs up, or tell us what we did wrong, because this is our first time. Kind of like the prom queen with her first you know what. We think we did all right, but advanced people might tell us differently. Enjoy, and come back and watch us for part 3 when we actually have it running. We'll see you all later.